Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the screens with growing anger. The USS Defiance hung in space above New Haven, a human colony that had taken 20 years to build. Now the colonists were loading their belongings onto transport ships, forced to leave their homes because the Galactic Council said they had to go. The Zephyrian fleet floated nearby like metal vultures waiting for carrion. Their ships were sleek and silver, designed to look impressive and intimidating. They had arrived 3 days ago with the same message they always brought to human colonies. Leave within 72 hours or face the consequences. Lisa Carter's voice came through the communication system from Earth Command. She was an admiral, the highest-ranking human in the fleet, and she sounded tired. Jake, we just got the official notice from the Council. They say New Haven breaks something called the Primitive Species Expansion Limitations Treaty. Jake shook his head as he looked at the legal document on his screen. Admiral, we never signed that treaty. How can they enforce laws we never agreed to follow? Dr. Alex Johnson, the ship's science officer, pulled up more files on his computer. He was a quiet man who spent most of his time studying alien technology and trying to understand how the galaxy's politics worked. This is the 15th colony they've targeted this year, Admiral. First they said we couldn't settle in the dangerous technology restriction zone. Then they created the protected sector boundaries. Now they have this new rule. On the main viewing screen they could see families walking up the ramps into the transport ships. Children carried small bags and looked back at their homes with confused faces. Adults moved with the slow, defeated walk of people who had given up fighting a system too big to beat. Kate Sullivan, the ship's weapons officer, clenched her hands into fists. She had grown up on a colony world before joining the military, and scenes like this made her want to start shooting. Ma'am, how long are we going to let them push us around? Every other species in the galaxy gets to expand wherever they want. The Arcturians have colonies in 300 systems. The Vexonians control entire sectors. But somehow humans are always the problem. Jake had been asking himself the same question for years. He had joined the military to protect human colonies, but all he ever did was watch them get abandoned. The Galactic Council had rules for everything, and those rules always seemed to work against humanity. They said humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed the same freedoms as other species. The irony was not lost on him. Humans were considered dangerous, so they were restricted and contained. But every time they followed the rules and gave up their colonies peacefully, it just proved to the Council that humans could be pushed around without consequences. Down on the planet's surface, most of the colonists had already boarded the transports. The buildings they had constructed were empty now, waiting to be claimed by whatever species the Council decided deserved this world more than humans. Schools where human children had learned to read sat vacant. Hospitals where human doctors had saved lives were abandoned. Farms where human families had grown food to feed their communities were left to go wild. But not everyone had given up. On the outskirts of the main settlement, an old farmer named Ben Parker stood in front of his house with his arms crossed. He was 73 years old and had spent the last 15 years turning raw alien soil into productive farmland. His wife was buried behind the house under a tree they had planted together. He was not leaving. The Zephyrian ground forces had been trying to convince him to go for the past hour. Their leader, a tall alien with blue skin and too many arms, kept pointing at official documents and speaking in the Universal Translator's flat, emotionless voice. Human Ben Parker, you must comply with evacuation order. Refusal to cooperate will result in enforcement action. Ben just stood there and shook his head. This is my home. I built it with my own hands. My wife is buried here. You want me gone, you're going to have to carry me out. Jake watched this confrontation through the ship's sensors, and he felt something cold settling in his stomach. He had seen this scene before on other worlds with other stubborn colonists who refused to abandon their homes. It never ended well. Admiral, he said into his communicator, we have a situation on the surface. One of the colonists is refusing to evacuate. Lisa Carter's voice came back immediately. Can we beam him up? Override his decision? He's in a dead zone for our transporters. The local geology is interfering with the signal. On the screen, the Zephyrian commander was losing patience. These aliens were not known for their understanding of human emotions. To them, attachment to a particular piece of land was primitive and illogical. They had given the evacuation order, and everyone was expected to comply. The fact that this old human was still standing there was becoming an embarrassment. Final warning, human Ben Parker. You will board transport vessel immediately or face immediate enforcement action. Ben Parker looked up at the sky, maybe seeing the human ships that hung there like helpless observers. Maybe he was thinking about his wife or the life he had built, or just the simple unfairness of being forced to leave by aliens who had never set foot on this world until 3 days ago. Go to hell, he said. The energy blast was quick and precise. The Zephyrian soldier who fired it showed no emotion as Ben Parker's body fell to the ground. To the alien, this was just the removal of an obstacle to efficient evacuation procedures. The human had been given multiple opportunities to comply with lawful orders and had chosen to resist. But to every human watching, it was murder. Jake Morrison felt something break inside his chest as he watched the old farmer die. Around him, his crew made small sounds of shock and rage. On the communication channel, he could hear Admiral Carter breathing hard, trying to control her voice. This was the moment that changed everything. Not the years of restrictions and arbitrary rules, not the forced evacuations and bureaucratic harassment, not even the casual contempt with which the Galactic Council treated humanity. It was the sight of an old man dying for the crime of refusing to abandon his home. All ships. Admiral Carter's voice came through the speakers, and now it was cold as space itself. Return to Earth immediately. Emergency session of the Human Defense Council convenes in 6 hours. Send word to every colony, every ship, every human in the galaxy. The age of asking permission is over. The emergency meeting hall on Luna Station had never seen anything like this before. Every human military commander who could make the journey was there. Colonial governors who had watched their worlds get abandoned sat next to ship captains who had been forced to stand by and do nothing. The room buzzed with angry voices and the sound of people who had finally reached their breaking point. Admiral Lisa Carter walked to the front of the room and the talking stopped. She had been fighting for human rights in the galaxy for 30 years, and everyone could see the weight of those battles in her face. Her uniform was clean and pressed, but her eyes were tired and hard. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, and her voice carried to every corner of the silent room. "For 50 years we have played by their rules. We have accepted their restrictions and their quotas and their special zones. We have been diplomatic when they were hostile. We have been reasonable when they were completely unfair." The crowd murmured agreement. Everyone in that room had a story about dealing with the Galactic Council's bureaucracy. Forms that took months to process, applications that were denied for reasons that made no sense, rules that seemed designed specifically to make human expansion as difficult as possible. General Ryan Brooks stood up from his chair near the front. He commanded the Colonial Defense Force, which was supposed to protect human settlements but had been reduced to helping with evacuations. "Admiral, the Vexonian delegation just sent us another ultimatum. They want us to abandon all our colonies beyond the Sol system. They are giving us 1 month to comply." A wave of angry voices swept through the room. People started shouting questions and complaints. How could they demand that humans abandon colonies that had been settled for decades? What right did the Vexonians have to tell humans where they could and could not live? Colonel Mary Foster slammed her hand on the table in front of her. She was a veteran of more colonial evacuations than she wanted to remember, and her patience had run out years ago. "They want us contained in one system while the Arcturians have spread across 300 worlds. The Drachmoth Empire controls entire sectors of space, but somehow humans are the problem." Dr. Nick Williams activated a holographic display that showed charts and graphs floating in the air above the crowd. He ran the Advanced Weapons Division, a department that most people did not know existed. "We have been holding back our real capabilities for decades, following their responsible development guidelines and their technology sharing agreements. Our actual military capacity is about 400% higher than what we have shown the Council." The room went quiet as people stared at the numbers floating in the air. Ships that could move faster than anything the Council knew about. Weapons that could punch through alien shields like they were made of paper. Defense systems that could protect entire planets from invasion. All of it sitting in storage because humanity had been trying to be good galactic citizens. Admiral Carter nodded and pressed a button on her control panel. Red lights began flashing throughout the station, and warning tones echoed through the corridors. "The Terran Federation has made its decision. We will no longer accept arbitrary restrictions on human expansion. We will no longer tolerate the forced evacuation of our colonies, and we will no longer pretend that we are the primitive species they believe us to be." She pressed another button, and the holographic display changed to show a map of human space. Red dots marked every colony that had been abandoned. Yellow dots showed colonies that were currently under threat. Green dots marked the colonies that were still free for now. Operation Breakout is now in effect. All human fleets are ordered to ignore Galactic Council movement restrictions. All colonies are to be defended by any means necessary. All diplomatic niceties are suspended until further notice. Commander Troy Mitchell raised his hand. He was young, maybe 25, and he had grown up on one of the evacuated worlds. His family had been forced to relocate 3 times because of Council restrictions. Admiral, what about Retaliation? The Council has us outnumbered 50-1. Their combined fleets could destroy every human world. Carter smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several people in the room step back. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator that had been pretending to be harmless for far too long. Son, they have never seen us actually fight. They have seen us follow their rules and accept their decisions and evacuate our colonies when they tell us to. But they have never seen what humans can do when we stop pretending to be civilized. The room erupted in cheers and applause. People were standing and shouting and pumping their fists in the air. For the first time in decades, humans were going to fight back instead of just accepting whatever the galaxy threw at them. But Admiral Carter was not finished. She held up her hand for silence, and the room gradually quieted down. This is not going to be easy. The Council has ships and troops and resources that we can only dream of. They have been the dominant power in this galaxy for thousands of years. They are not going to just let us walk away from their authority. She paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as she could. But they have made one critical mistake in all their calculations about humanity. They think that because we have been peaceful, we are weak. They think that because we have followed their rules, we cannot break them. They think that because we come from just one world, we cannot threaten their empire. The holographic display changed again, showing images of Earth, blue oceans and green continents and white clouds swirling through the atmosphere. It looked peaceful and beautiful, like a paradise world where nothing dangerous could possibly evolve. They forget that Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. They forget that humans evolved as apex predators on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. They forget that we are the species that survived ice ages and asteroid impacts and volcanic eruptions that would have wiped out any other form of life. She pressed one final button and the display showed human soldiers in combat armor, human ships with weapons powered up, human colonies with defensive shields activated. They are about to remember why every other species in this galaxy has nightmares about Death World predators. Operation Breakout begins immediately. The meeting broke up with people rushing to their ships and their commands. There were preparations to make and orders to give and a war to start. But for the first time in 50 years, humans were not running away from a fight. They were running toward one. The first sign that everything had changed came at the Kepler 442 system. The Zephyrian Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find another helpless human colony ready for evacuation. Instead, they found the UHS Retribution waiting for them in high orbit around the planet. Captain Steve Davis had volunteered his ship and crew for this moment. He sat in his command chair watching the Zephyrian ships form up in their standard intimidation formation. 12 heavy cruisers and 30 escort vessels, all painted in the silver and blue colors that were supposed to represent Galactic Council authority. The Zephyrian fleet commander opened a communication channel, and his translator voice filled the bridge of the Retribution. Human vessel, you are in violation of Council Evacuation Order 7743B. Remove yourself from this system immediately, and allow lawful enforcement action to proceed. Steve looked around his bridge at his crew. These were men and women who had spent years watching human colonies get abandoned. They had followed orders and kept their weapons powered down and tried to solve problems with words instead of actions. Today was different. Zephyrian Fleet, Steve replied into his communicator. This is Captain Steve Davis of the Human Defense Force. The people on this planet are under our protection. If you want them to leave, you will have to go through us first. There was a long pause before the alien commander responded. Captain Davis, your vessel is outnumbered 43-1. Withdraw immediately or face destruction. Steve smiled and looked at his weapons officer. Lieutenant Commander Amy Parker had been waiting for this moment her entire career. She nodded and powered up the ship's weapon systems. Energy readings that should have been impossible began showing up on Zephyrian sensors. "Zephyrian fleet," Steve said, and his voice was calm and steady. "Come and take it." The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes and 34 seconds. The Zephyrian ships moved in with their standard tactics, trying to surround the single human vessel and force it to surrender. Their energy shields glowed bright blue as they prepared to absorb return fire from primitive human weapons. The first salvo from the Retribution's kinetic cannons punched through their shields like they were made of tissue paper. Tungsten projectiles moving at 30% of light speed slammed into alien hulls that had never been designed to handle that kind of impact. 3 Zephyrian cruisers simply disintegrated. The alien fleet tried to scatter and regroup, but human targeting systems had been tracking every ship from the moment they arrived. Missile salvos that the Zephyrians could not even detect on their sensors streaked across space and found their targets with perfect accuracy. When the Zephyrians tried to board the human ship, they discovered that their soldiers were completely unprepared for combat against humans. The aliens wore light armor and carried energy weapons designed for police work against compliant populations. The human Marines wore powered combat suits and carried projectile weapons that could punch through bulkheads. The Zephyrian boarding parties found themselves fighting an enemy that had evolved on a death world, humans who could operate in gravity fields that would crush most alien species, humans who could fight in atmospheric conditions that would poison other forms of life, humans who had learned warfare from thousands of years of killing each other in the most creative ways possible. When the shooting stopped, 37 Zephyrian ships were dead in space. The remaining 6 vessels were broadcasting surrender signals and begging for mercy. Captain Davis accepted their surrender and ordered his crew to begin rescue operations for alien survivors. The news of the victory spread through human space faster than light-speed communications could carry it. But it also reached the Galactic Council chambers on Proxima Tertius, where an emergency session was called within hours. The council chamber was a massive circular room with delegates from hundreds of species. The ceiling was transparent aluminum that showed the stars beyond, and the walls were covered with the flags and symbols of every civilization that belonged to the galactic government. It was designed to be impressive and to remind everyone that the council represented the combined power of thousands of worlds. Councillor Thexhai of the Vexonian Empire was screaming at his podium. His species looked like giant lizards walking upright, and when they got angry, their scales turned dark red. "This is completely unacceptable. The humans have violated 17 different interstellar laws. They have committed acts of war against a lawful council enforcement fleet." Ambassador Susan Clark stood at the human delegation's position and looked completely calm. She had been representing humanity to the council for 8 years, and she had gotten very good at dealing with alien outrage. "Councillor Thexhai, please tell me which specific laws we have violated, because according to my records, humanity never agreed to any of the restrictions you have been trying to enforce." The Arcturian delegate activated the chamber's central holographic display. Zilmoth was a floating jellyfish-like creature that communicated through color changes in its translucent body. The Primitive Species Protection Act clearly states that developing civilizations must accept guidance and limitations from established galactic powers. Susan smiled and pulled up her own legal documents. A law that was passed without human input, about human limitations, without human consent. We reject its validity, and we always have. You cannot make laws about us without us. High Counselor Vextar leaned forward in his elevated seat. The Drachmoth were the oldest and most powerful species in the council, and they were used to having their authority respected without question. You forget your place, human. Your species exists in this galaxy at the council's sufferance. We could destroy every human world if we chose to do so. The chamber fell completely silent. Every delegate turned to look at the human ambassador, expecting her to back down or apologize or at least show some kind of fear. Instead, Susan Clark's expression changed. The diplomatic mask she had worn for years fell away, and something else took its place, something that made several alien delegates step backward instinctively. "No, High Counselor," she said, and her voice carried clearly through the silent chamber. "You have forgotten your place. Humanity has been patient with your bureaucracy. We have been diplomatic with your threats. We have tried to work within your system even when that system was designed to work against us. But you made one critical error in all your calculations." She pressed a control button on her podium, and new images filled the chamber's display systems. Human ships dropping out of hyperspace around a dozen different council worlds. Not attacking, just waiting in orbit like silent promises of what could happen. You assumed we were weak because we followed your rules. You assumed we were helpless because we accepted your restrictions. You assumed we were primitive because we tried to solve our problems with words instead of weapons. You are about to learn the difference between choosing restraint and being incapable of violence. The display showed more images. Human colonies that had been evacuated were now being reoccupied by human ships. Council enforcement fleets were being turned away by human warships that appeared out of nowhere. Alien officials who tried to impose council authority on human worlds were being politely but firmly escorted off the planets. The next council, ship that attempts to evacuate a human colony, will discover exactly why Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. The next council official who threatens human sovereignty will learn why every species in this galaxy has nightmares about predators from high-gravity planets. The age of pushing humanity around is over. The war lasted 6 weeks and 3 days. It took the Galactic Council's military strategists exactly 3 weeks to realize they were not fighting the same humans they thought they knew. Fleet Admiral Tony Martinez commanded the largest human battle group in history as it swept through the Perseus Arm. His flagship, the UHS Independence, led 47 warships in a formation that would have been impossible with the primitive technology the Council thought humans possessed. These ships moved with precision that stunned alien observers who watched the battles from safe distances. "Admiral," reported Captain Lisa Turner from the destroyer UHS Vengeance, "the Arcturian Defense Fleet at Wolf 359 is requesting terms for surrender." Martinez looked at his tactical display and shook his head in amazement. The battle had lasted 43 minutes from start to finish. The Arcturian fleet that had been terrorizing human colonies for years was now floating dead in space or running away at maximum speed. "Tell them they can surrender their ships and crews will be treated according to standard warfare protocols," Martinez said. "But their government needs to understand that every human colony they force to evacuate will be reestablished. And they will provide reparations for all the damages they caused." The Arcturian commander's response came back within minutes. Complete agreement to all human demands. The aliens who had spent decades treating humans like troublesome children were now begging for mercy from the species they had underestimated. On Earth, the war effort had transformed human civilization overnight. Factories that had been producing civilian goods were now turning out weapons and armor and spacecraft. Dr. Amy Richardson stood in the Advanced Weapons Laboratory watching the final tests of their newest creation. The gravity manipulator cannon had been theoretical for decades. Council scientists had declared such weapons too dangerous for galactic peace and had forbidden any research into their development. Now human engineers were putting the finishing touches on a device that could create localized gravity wells 15 times stronger than Earth normal. "Amy," called Dr. Carl Thompson from across the laboratory, "the field tests are complete. We can generate gravity fields strong enough to crush any known spacecraft design. The targeting systems are accurate to within 10 meters at maximum range." Amy nodded and activated her communication system. "Deploy them to Admiral Martinez's fleet immediately. Let's see how the Council's ships handle being flattened by their own mass." Meanwhile, in the depths of space near the galactic core, Captain Gary Phillips was making a discovery that would change everything. His stealth reconnaissance ship had been monitoring Council communications for weeks, intercepting their military orders and diplomatic messages. "Command, this is Shadowrunner," Gary transmitted to Earth on an encrypted channel. "You need to hear this conversation we recorded between the Drachmoth High Command and the Vexonian Military Council." Admiral Carter's voice came back immediately. "What did you find, Gary?" "Ma'am, they have been planning this for years, maybe decades. The restrictions on human expansion, the forced evacuations, the territory limitations. It was not about maintaining galactic peace or protecting primitive species. They have been systematically weakening every civilization that showed potential to challenge their dominance." Gary played back the intercepted transmission, alien voices speaking in their own languages, with human computers providing translation. The conversation was clinical and matter-of-fact. discussing the elimination of potential threats to Council authority. The Rigelians were contained successfully, one voice said. Their expansion was limited to 12 systems before they accepted Council oversight. The Centaurian Federation was disbanded after we convinced them their military was a threat to galactic stability. Another voice responded with what sounded like satisfaction. The humans are proving more stubborn than expected, but the pattern remains the same. Force them to abandon their outer colonies, restrict their technology development, and within a generation they will accept permanent limitations on their growth. The recording continued with detailed discussions of other species that had been neutralized. Civilizations that had shown promise had been systematically reduced to client states or eliminated entirely. The Galactic Council was not a peacekeeping organization. It was a protection racket designed to prevent any species from growing strong enough to challenge the established order. All ships, Admiral Carter broadcast to every human vessel in the galaxy. New mission parameters. We are not just fighting for our colonies anymore. We are not just defending human rights. We are liberating the entire galaxy from a criminal organization that has been masquerading as a legitimate government. The revelation changed everything about how humans approach the war. This was not a dispute over territorial rights or expansion policies. This was a fight between freedom and oppression on a galactic scale. Admiral Martinez received his new orders while his fleet was approaching the Altair system. The local Drachmoth garrison had been using that world as a base for raiding human shipping, and the plan had been to eliminate the threat and move on to the next target. All ships, change of mission, Martinez announced to his fleet. We are not just here to destroy enemy forces. We are here to liberate every species that has been oppressed by Council authority. Intelligence reports indicate there are at least 6 different alien civilizations being held under Council control in this sector. The battle for Altair lasted 8 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of the Drachmoth fleet. But the real victory came when human forces made contact with the planet's surface. The world was inhabited by a species called the Kepler, who had been reduced to virtual slavery by their Council overseers. We thought we were alone, the Kepler leader told Captain Diana Ross when she led the first landing party to their capital city. We thought every species in the galaxy had accepted Council authority willingly. We never knew there were others fighting back. Captain Ross activated her communication system and connected the Kepler leader to Admiral Carter on Earth. Admiral, I think you need to hear this. It turns out we are not the only ones who want the Council gone. Similar discoveries were being made throughout human-occupied space. Species after species that had been told they were alone in their resistance to Council authority. Civilizations that had been convinced that accepting limitations on their freedom was the price of galactic citizenship. The war was no longer between humans and the Galactic Council. It had become a revolution that was spreading across the galaxy as fast as human ships could carry the message. Freedom was possible. Resistance was not futile. The Council's authority was not legitimate. And humanity was leading the charge to tear down a system of oppression that had controlled the galaxy for thousands of years. The species that the Council had dismissed as primitive and dangerous was teaching the rest of the galaxy how to fight for their rights. The Council's greatest fear was coming true. They had created the very thing they had tried to prevent, a coalition of free species that refused to accept arbitrary authority, and it was being led by the predators from the death world called Earth. The siege of Proxima Tertius lasted exactly 8 hours and 14 minutes. The Council's home system had been protected by the most advanced defense networks in the galaxy, with orbital platforms that could destroy entire fleets and energy shields that had never been penetrated in 3,000 years of galactic history. All of it fell to human forces with minimal casualties. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship as the last Council defense station went dark. The secret to their victory had not been superior numbers or even superior technology, though both had helped. The real advantage was something the Council had never encountered before in all their centuries of dominance. Humans fought like they had nothing left to lose. The Council species had grown comfortable with their authority. They had ruled the galaxy for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that would rather die than surrender. When human ships took damage that should have forced them to retreat, they kept fighting. When human soldiers were outnumbered 10-1, they found ways to win anyway. Admiral, reported Captain Scott Williams from the assault carrier UHS Freedom, All Council government facilities are secured. Resistance has ended. The surviving Council members are requesting terms for surrender. Jake looked at the tactical display showing the Proxima system. Dozens of human ships floated in orbit around the Council's capital world, but they were not alone. Ships from the Kepler Republic and the Retaliation Alliance and 6 other species had joined the final assault. The Liberation Fleet represented more civilizations than had ever cooperated in galactic history. "Take me down to the Council chambers," Jake ordered. "It's time to finish this." The Council chambers had once been the most impressive building on Proxima Tertius. The circular room with its transparent ceiling and walls covered in alien flags had been designed to overwhelm visitors with the scope of galactic civilization. Now it looked small and empty, with most of the delegate seats vacant. Admiral Jake Morrison walked into the chamber wearing his dress uniform and carrying no weapons. Behind him came representatives from every species that had joined the Liberation. The Kepler delegate was a tall insect-like creature with compound eyes that reflected the chamber's lights. The Rigelian ambassador looked like a living crystal that sang when it moved. There were others, species that had been hidden away or suppressed for so long that most of the galaxy had forgotten they existed. The surviving Council members sat in their chairs and tried to look dignified. High Counselor Vextar of the Drachmoth still wore his ceremonial robes, but his hands shook as he watched the humans approach. Counselor Thexhai of the Vexonians kept his scales a neutral color and avoided making eye contact with anyone. "Members of the former Galactic Council," Jake began, and his voice echoed in the mostly empty chamber. "You stand accused of systematic oppression, unlawful restriction of sentient species rights, forced relocation, and genocide. The evidence against you is overwhelming and undeniable." Ambassador Susan Clark, who had spent years representing humanity to these same aliens, now stood as prosecutor in their trial. She activated the chamber's holographic systems and filled the air with images and documents and recorded conversations. 47 different species forcibly contained or eliminated over the past 2 centuries, she said, as the evidence floated in the air around them. Thousands of colonies destroyed or abandoned. Millions of sentient beings killed or displaced. All of this justified by laws you wrote for systems you created to benefit only yourselves. The Zephyrian delegate tried to stand up from his chair. "You cannot simply overthrow legitimate government. The galaxy needs order and structure. Without the Council, there will be chaos and war." Captain Diana Ross stepped forward from her position with the human delegation. She had spent the last 6 weeks liberating worlds and freeing species that had been oppressed for generations. "You are right about one thing. The galaxy does need order, but it needs justice first, and you never provided that." The trial proceeded quickly because there was little the Council members could say in their defense. The evidence of their crimes was documented in their own files. The testimonies of their victims filled hundreds of hours of recordings. Species after species came forward to describe how the Council had destroyed their hopes for freedom and growth. But the humans were not interested in revenge. Admiral Carter appeared on the chamber's communication system from Earth, where she was coordinating the massive effort to rebuild what the Council had destroyed. "The Terran Federation does not seek to replace the Galactic Council with human authority," she announced to the assembled delegates. "We seek to create something that has never existed before in this galaxy. A true democracy where species are judged not by their technology level or their compliance with arbitrary restrictions, but by their commitment to freedom and justice for all sentient life." Dr. Alex Johnson, now serving as head of the Galactic Restoration Project, stood at the center of the chamber where the Council's authority symbol had once been displayed. In its place was a holographic representation of dozens of different worlds, each one representing a species that had joined the new alliance. "We are establishing the Galactic Democratic Assembly," he announced. "Every species will have representation proportional to their population. Every decision will be made by majority vote. Every law will apply equally to all member civilizations, and any species that wishes to leave the assembly will be free to do so at any time." The transformation happened faster than anyone had expected. Species that had been hidden under Council oppression for centuries emerged to join the new government. Technologies that had been banned as too dangerous were shared freely among civilizations ready to use them responsibly. Worlds that had been restricted or abandoned were reopened for colonization by any species that wanted them. The Andromedan observers, who had been watching the Milky Way galaxy for thousands of years, sent their first diplomatic mission in living memory. They had been waiting to see if any species would develop enough to challenge the Council's monopoly on power. Humanity had not just challenged it, they had destroyed it and built something better in its place. 6 months after the fall of Proxima Tertius, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the new assembly station that was being constructed at the galaxy's political center. It was not a fortress or a seat of empire. It was a hospital and a school and a shipyard all combined into one massive structure dedicated to helping every species in the galaxy reach their full potential. Admiral, reported Dr. Johnson. From the station's coordination center, the Rigelian delegation has agreed to the new Galactic Charter. That makes 37 species who have signed the founding documents. The Tau-Cetian Republic wants to join as well, and they are bringing their allies from the outer spiral. Jake looked out at the stars and thought about Ben Parker, the old farmer whose death had started this revolution. The man had refused to abandon his home, and in dying for that principle he had inspired an entire galaxy to fight for the same right to exist freely. The Council had made one fundamental error in all their calculations about humanity. They had assumed that a species capable of restraint was incapable of violence. They had learned too late that the most dangerous predator is the one that chooses when to hunt. Humanity had not just snapped. They had awakened something in the galaxy that had been sleeping for far too long. The idea that freedom was not a privilege to be granted by authority, but a right to be claimed by anyone brave enough to fight for it. And the galaxy would never be the same.